Hey, Vlad here, devinside.com. Welcome to another video. In the previous couple of videos, we talked extensively about all kinds of history rewriting tools, and I have some good news for you. We're almost done with this series. Today we will cover a bunch of leftovers that slipped through the cracks in the previous videos, and in the next one we're going to talk about a little thing called conventional commits. And then we're done. Let's get right to it. Alright, so we're going to cover a lot of really tiny topics today, so this video might appear a bit jumpy. As I already mentioned, these are many little things that I couldn't fit into any other video, and so I decided to smash all of them together into this one. Let's start with the bare repositories. Since the very beginning of the series, when we were cloning the repositories from GitHub, their extension was .git. I have one of them opened right here. This is the 7-segment display clock, and we click over here and go to SSH and go over here to the very end. Well, I was hoping that it would scroll until the very end. Maybe I should need to press right. Okay, as you can see over here, it ends in .git. This happened because the repositories on GitHub are the so-called bare repositories. Now, what is a bare repository? Well, a bare repository is nothing scary. Whereas a regular repository contains a .git directory, which is Git's database, and your working copy, which is all of your files, a bare repository contains only the .git directory. If you think about it, GitHub never needs the actual working files. It can work directly with Git's database to display all of the contents over here. In fact, instead of having your project directory and inside of it a very lonely .git directory, you can fuse them together and have only one directory, which is the name of your project, .git, which is technically just a convention. So if you wanted to replicate this real quick, let me go over here. So let's change the directory into dev interactive rebase playground 7-segment display clock. So if I do L over here, we're going to see that there's a bunch of stuff, and there is also the .git directory. And if we look inside into .git, we're going to see that this is the Git's database. All right. Now, if you create a similar directory, I'm going to go up and I'm going to create a 7-segment display clock, and I'm going to call it .git. Again, it's just a convention to call it .git. And so now inside of it, when we initialize the repository, we're simply going to ask Git to generate a bare repository, which means to dump the contents of the .git directory into this one. Okay, so now if we do L, we're going to see the contents of this directory, which is going to look exactly the same, well, pretty much the same as the contents of the .git directory inside of 7-segment display clock. And by the way, Git supports a lot of protocols, and one of them is the file protocol. So if you just wanted to play around, let me go out a little bit like this. Okay, so over here we have now these two directories, this one and this one. So what we can do is we can create a directory. We're going to call it remote repo.git. Okay, we're going to go inside of it. Well, we're already inside of it. We're going to initialize a bare repository. Technically, this doesn't need to be a bare repository, but since we're already talking about bare repositories, I might as well do it like this. I'm going to go back out, okay, and I'm going to do gclone remote repo dot git. Okay, so it's going to clone it from this directory into the local directory over here. So now I have a clone of this other repository. In fact, let me actually move this clone. I'm going to call it local repo, just so that it's a little bit less confusing. Okay, so now we have a local repo and the remote repo.git, and they're connected to each other, right? So what we can do is we can go inside of it. Okay, we can do grb, and it's going to tell us that the origin is now just a regular file. Okay, so for example, if we dump some content into a file and we commit everything, let me remind you about this alias because I have overridden it, right? So it adds everything and then commits the message. Commit initial commit like this, right? So now we can push this branch, right? So we push this branch into home Vlad, into the bare repository, which is technically the remote repository. Okay, we go in there. Sorry, like this, cd remote repo. Okay, so and I'm gonna do glol. In fact, I believe this is the first time that I'm showing you glol. We're going to see it a bit later in the video. So what we have been doing so far was this, right? It's basically the same thing, just without the timestamp and without the author, right? It just said over here you're seeing that we basically pushed, we synchronized the changes. Okay, so Git doesn't really care where it is. Remember, in the very first video, I told you that your hosting options are ranging from a Raspberry Pi in your mama's basement to full-blown hosting solutions like GitLab or GitHub. And there is really nothing more to it. when it comes to bare repositories. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the show command. We have seen the log command like this one and its many incarnations, and we have seen a bunch of flags that you can pass into the log command. Well, it turns out that you can pass pretty much the same flags to the show command. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the log command behind the scenes calls the show command and passes the same flags. So let's actually go out and let's go into this one, not the empty bare repository that we just created, but this one. And we're going to first of all, we're going to turn off the pager global pager show false. Okay, so what we can do is glog, right? So this is our repository from the previous time. And so what we can do is we could, for example, say git show. I'm gonna grab a random commit, like for example the initial one, like this one. This is what we have seen so far, right? So by default, it shows you the patch, it shows you some data. Oh man, okay, so we shouldn't take the first one. The first one was where we added like really everything. Let's take another one. Let's take this one, 35D13. Okay, so G show 35D13 like this. Okay, so this is much smaller. Okay, so it was just a small change. In fact, it's not that small, but still, we're seeing the commit, we're seeing the author, we're seeing the date over here, we're seeing the commit message, we're seeing the diff. Okay, now one of the flags that you can pass to the show command is the -s or -- no patch. It's exactly the same flag, no patch or s, right? So this is the shortest one, right? So you see just the commit, just the hash, the author, the date, and the commit message. Another one is where you can specify the format, which is going to be one line. We already know this, the same as with the logs. Then we can do a short. Okay, we're seeing pretty much almost the same as before. We don't see the date, for example. Then we're going to see medium. Medium is a default. This is what we have already seen. Now we can do full, which also shows you the author. And we're going to talk about this in just a couple of minutes. In fact, it shows you the commit, right? Before we have seen the author, now it also shows you the commit, and we're going to talk about the difference in just a few seconds. And then we can also see the fuller, where we see the author date and the commit date. Same as with the logs, instead of doing format one line, we can just do -- one line like this, and it will also abbreviate the commits like this. All right, now let's talk about this difference between the committers and authors. Before version control systems, people used to send patches to each other via email. In fact, if you were looking into the manual files for Git, you would see a lot of nomenclature about mailboxes and manually applying patches. And so pretty much since the beginning of Git had built-in functionality for emailing patches to others or manually applying them, which is also the reason why when we were trying to commit for the very first time, Git forced us to specify the user.name and the user.email. And by the way, this functionality still has use cases today. For instance, let's say that your organization uses a bunch of single repos and you were the one to migrate all of them into a monorepo, right? It's going to take you a couple of weeks or whatever, however long it's going to take you. But in the meantime, your people are still going to commit to the single repositories. And so whenever you're done or whenever you're going to switch, there will be always some commits left just laying around, and you will have to manually apply them into your monorepo. And so when somebody sends you a commit, you are going to be the one who is going to apply it. So you are going to be the one who creates this commit. When this is happening, Git knows who is committing, but it has no idea who the original author was. And so Git has a built-in functionality to specify the author just for the purposes of giving credit, which is quite a noble idea, I might add. As a byproduct, things like rebases actually affect those fields, at least the author date fields, which is why you see the difference over here between the author date and the commit date. Because as mentioned hundreds of times, everything is immutable, so a rebase creates new commits. Now these days we have fancy features like forking. Forking is a GitHub feature which allows you to copy somebody else's project and add it to your account. When you then clone your copy to your machine and run something like grv, which stands for git remote verbose, you're going to see that behind the scenes it sets up two remote repositories for you. For example, what we're going to see right now is Scala's documentation repository over here. And if you wanted to add documentation, which is something that I wanted to do, I would press the fork button over here. Now actually I already did it. Now if we had the GitHub Refined extension, which I mentioned already many times, I'm going to add it over here. Okay, let's see, there we go. So if I go back over here and I reload this page, then over here we're going to have a tiny little button which will allow me to go to my own fork. okay, it will understand that I have a fork. I was expecting this to actually happen, but it didn't happen. Last time I was playing with it, it actually had a button over here that I could go to my own fork. Maybe it's in my pull request. Let me refresh over here. No, it is still not here. It doesn't really matter. We'll go there manually because I just need to go over here, which is the organization of the repository, and I just need to change it to my name, right? My account. So this was the fork, and as you can see over here, it was forked from Scala doc Scala lang. All right, and so I went over here, I copied my own, I cloned my own repository, I created a topic branch, I did some changes, I pushed my branch to my fork, and then I created a PR on the original Scala doc Scala lang repository. In order to create PR through GitHub, I actually pressed the open the PR button in my fork, but it actually opened the PR over there, and this is the PR that you have just seen. By now it has already been merged. It's been 20 days ago, and if I scroll down over here, GitHub will actually allow me to delete my branch, and it will actually say, if you wish, you can also delete this fork in the settings, which is very convenient. So I'm going to open the settings over here, and I'm going to click delete branch. All right, so the settings open over here, and it says, do you really want to remove it? And I will say yes, please remove. Let's remove it. There we go. And I need my password. There we go. And now it's gone. Great. We don't need this one anymore. In fact, let me actually open my distribution. This is the local one, the one that is called Space. It's my workspace. This is the one that I use to prepare all of my videos. So somewhere over here, yeah, which is exactly actually over here, I have a directory inside of dev. I have a directory called GitHub. Inside of it, I have a directory called Scala, and inside of it, I have the repository over here. Okay, so if I go in there and I do alias grv, and I'm going to run grv, then we're going to see that the origin is my copy, but there's also upstream, which is the original fork. By the way, I don't believe that I have explained to you why we actually have two URLs over here instead of just one. Well, in some very complicated topologies, you might be allowed to fetch stuff from a repository, but you might not be allowed to actually push stuff to it, so you would push somewhere else. But in practice, this actually never happens. By the way, check out this bit of nostalgia. Contrary to popular belief, pull requests are actually not just a GitHub feature. It's actually a Git feature. So if we were to go up again, we have our local repository here. Okay, so let's go in there. Okay, and we're going to, as a reminder, alias GCB create branch. So we're going to do GCB topic. Okay, and we're going to echo something else into a file, and we're going to, well, not into a gile. Well, it doesn't really matter. Let's move the gile to file. All right. So we're going to commit this. Okay. Okay. And now we're going to gp sup git push set upstream. Okay. Right. So we want to create this branch on the remote repository, which is local, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. So we're going to do gp sup. Okay. And now check this out. We're going to create a pull request. We're going to say request pull. Okay, and then please Git compare the difference between what I currently have on my main branch and my topic branch. And by the way, push the whole thing to origin, and it prints out this tiny thing. It says this was the initial commit. All right, basically says the following changes since commit 0d2, which is glol 0d2, which is the initial commit. Okay, are available in the Git repository at, and it shows me the the remote repository, right, the dot git, for you to fetch changes up to this one, right, which is called whatever, and these are the changes, right? So you could take this, like literally copy paste it and actually send an email to somebody. In fact, you wouldn't need to do this because Git actually has a functionality to actually send this email for you. By the way, let's go back to the PR real quick. I want to show you a little tiny cool thing over here. Behind every pull request, you can just go and do dot patch, and it will show you the actual patch, the actual changes that were done. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I just added this section which adds the the link to my YouTube channel on the Scala documentation side. Another fun fact: GitHub has a concept of issues, and behind the scenes, they're implemented with the same kind of semantics, with the same kind of database. So behind the scenes, it's exactly the same thing. It's just that the pull requests also have patches, and in fact, they're sharing the IDs between each other. So if I were to go back over here, right, and if I were to replace pull with issues like this, then it's going to look into the database. It's going to understand, hey, this is not an ID of an issue. This is actually an ID of a pull request. And it will actually change the URL for me to pull, and it will actually go there. this is exactly what happened. By the way, there are sort of two kinds of forks out there. One is where you just want to contribute to a repository, which is exactly what we just did over here. And the other one is when you're disagreeing with the direction that the project is taking, for example, like Vim and NeoVim, and you start developing your own thing. Please always make sure to check out the license. It's very, very important. You can't just go and steal people's stuff. All right, let's talk about logs a little bit more. In fact, I'm going to go back to my my own repository over here. I'm sorry, my own distribution over here, and we're going to stay in this repository for doc scala lang, and we're going to do something like g count. Okay, like this, which is git short log -sn. Okay, let's run it like this, and we see how many, who did what, how many changes on my current branch. Okay, another thing that you can do is, this is something that you would typically do, you would have in the release notes. You would see like how many people contributed to the current release. So you would do something like g count, and then you don't want to have the merges, and it's going to look like this. Okay, you can also give it a range, for example, from a current head, and let's go back a little bit like this. I don't believe that we need spaces. In fact, I actually don't know if it's going to work with the spaces or not. Okay, it seems like it doesn't. Okay, let's do this, and let's do that like this. Okay, there's nothing in there. Maybe I need to do it like this. Like this. Yeah, there we go. Now a bunch of aliases, a couple of things we already seen. glog, and as a reminder, like most of these aliases, well, 99% of these aliases, they come from ZSH, from the ZSH Git plugin. I have overridden a couple of them. We pretty much have done it together, and you can always consult my dotfiles. All right, so glog is to show git log, and we're also going to show it as a graph. Then glod is the one with the timestamp over here, same thing, but with a timestamp. Then you have glods, which also shows you the summary. I'm sorry, this one shows the short version of the date, which is over here. Then you can also do glols, which is like this, and it shows you the relative date, right? So instead of the actual date, it shows you, 4 months ago. You also have the version that shows you the entire graph instead of just what is reachable from your current place. So it's pretty much the same thing, just with an A at the end, gloga and glol. By the way, in this entire series, I'm pretty much sure that I always use the all version, which didn't really make a difference. But in practice, most of the time, like 99% of the time, you never need the all version. You want to see, from your current one. For example, over here, as you can see, it shows me like the master, and even though I'm not, I'm on my branch, and I don't really care what developed on master in the meantime. Okay, I just want to see like my stuff. So as you can see, it's much smaller, and it's much more readable, especially like if it's your stuff. It's way more readable. If it's your stuff, your team, it's way more readable. And so most of the times, the one that I'm actually running is this one, glol. In fact, I have changed it slightly in my dotfiles. If you run it by default with ZSH, then this is going to be red, and there will be parens around the date, and there will be angular brackets around the author name. You can override it yourself, right? So this is what I did. I pretty much, I just copied it from ZSH, and I removed I believe this is the author. I removed the parens, and I removed the I'm sorry, for the angular brackets from the author, and this is the date, and I removed the parens. In fact, you can always consult my dot files. I believe I actually have them already opened over here. So if you scroll down, okay, this is actually my git config. Let me actually duplicate this one and go back to git over here. And actually what we need is my bash files. Okay, so these are all my dot files. Tiny trick about GitHub, you can press T and you can search for a file. So I'm searching for bash aliases, exactly this one. Okay, so you can always scroll down and you can see mine. So this is what I have just shown you pretty much. All right, just as a reminder, my like all my dot files, they're changing all the time, pretty much every day, because I'm always improving the developer inside me. Another thing about logs is you can also specify the default format. In fact, I have done it over here. So you can also create your own aliases. So if I do g space l, it's going to run this command over here, and so by default it would, it's similar to glog, right? With also the relative date, okay? But it also uses the format over here. In fact, I copy pasted this format from somebody a long time ago, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to remove like this line and also this line pretty much after I finish recording this video. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is searching, and for this we're going to require assistance of an awesome tool called FZF, which is a fuzzy finder. I have an entire video about it. You should definitely check it out. It's going to change your life, I'm sure. So a fuzzy finder essentially searches through any list that you give it to it. So we're not going to need it for the next 2 minutes, but then at some point we're going to need it, and I don't want to interrupt my explanation, so we're going to go and install it right away. As for most things, I have an install script for it. So if you go to install that insider.com and do FZF, then we're going to go and grab these two lines. Okay, these two lines. By the way, a fun fact behind the scenes, it actually uses Git to just clone the FZF directory into your home directory. Okay, so we're gonna go over here, which is this VM that we have been using all the time. So I'm just going to paste these two lines. I'm going to enter my password. Oh, I don't even need to enter my password because it just clones the directory into my home. It clones the directory into my home directory, and then it runs a script called install over here. As you can see, it runs the script that is inside, which is why we're being asked, do you want to enable fuzzy auto completion? Yes. Key bindings? Yes. And do you want to update your shell configuration files? Yes, because they're updated. I'm actually going to go out real quick, and I'm going to go back in like this. All right, so we're going to go over here, and we're going to do it like this. Again, I have an entire video about FZF, so I don't want to waste your time, but essentially you can give it any list. Like for example, LL gives you this list, and you can take LL, you can pipe it into FZF, right? And it will allow you to search for something. So if I start typing something like merge, it will find this line, and all it does is it prints this line back out to me. In this particular case, it's not super important. I'm not going to do anything with this line, but there is literally an endless amount of possibilities of what you can do with FZF. Definitely check out my video. All right, now let's talk about searching, and for this we're going to need to clone some other repository of mine. I have a repository which contains a template for a Scala project, and there are tools. In fact, we're going to use a tool today called Jitterate that will use this template to create a default Scala project. As of right now, we're not going to use it. We're simply going to use it as an example of a repository. Okay, so I'm going to go in there. Okay, in fact, I'm going to open it with Visual Studio Code so that I can show you around just a little bit so that you understand, because we're going to search for stuff, and I want to show you, the results of the search before we actually start searching. So inside of it, for example, is going to be, not now, inside of it, there is this file called test suite. And this is the only one that we care about, because what we're going to search for is going to be whiz space. This is what we're going to search for. Okay, let me go back to the terminal, and we're going to start searching. The first thing we're going to learn is that Git actually has a command called grep, which is very similar to the regular grep. It allows you to search inside of the files. So for example, you can do git grep, and you can do -c for count, and as already mentioned, we're going to search for whiz space. All right, and it's going to find this one. So it's going to find finding YAML. It's going to say there's 8 of them. Thumbnail YouTube, there's 1 of them, and it actually found test suite was a :7. By the way, this is not some weird grep output. This is literally the name of the directory. It's a templating thing, like these things are being replaced and stuff, so don't get scared. Now, if I actually want to see this, and I want to see the lines as well, so we're going to replace C with M. Okay, so it's going to show us, okay, so this is the finding YAML on line 5, on line 6, 7, 8 is this stuff. Then the thumbnail is a binary file, so it can't really show us in which line it is. And on the test suite, on the lines 14, 15, 16, it has like all of these whiz. As you can see, it's these lines over here. There are a couple of formatting options that are very, very useful. For example, it can group these things, so they're already grouped, but it can insert an empty line over here and an empty line over here if you just ask it to break like this. Okay, as you can see, empty line over here. There should have been an empty line over here. I have no idea why there is none. And you can also, as you can see, like the name of the file repeats, and in this particular case, the name of the file is very, very long. So you can ask it to just use the name of the file as a heading of this section. And you do this by doing heading like this. Now it's much more pleasant. Okay, so you have funding, a bunch of stuff, then you have the binary file, then you have this test suite file, and a bunch of stuff, and now you can actually see, that thing over here. Now, a fun thing that Git actually has, it has a concept of figuring out the scope of the thing that you're searching for. Most programming languages, they have a notion of a lexical scope, and most of them, they denote the lexical scope by something like curly brackets or indentation. Okay, so if we go over here, if we're searching for these whiz thingies, right, their scope is going to be this trait. Okay, if we were to searching for something like this, its scope would be this thing. Okay, so if we go out and we're going to ask it for scope with P over here, right, then it's going to figure out that, for example, like all of these guys, they were part of this trait, and all of these guys, they were part of Patreon, I guess. Let's actually look into funding YAML. Funding YAML. This is how it looks like. Okay, so it thinks that it's part of this scope, but it's not, right? It just tries to figure this out for you, just like on the syntactical basis, but it's obviously not bulletproof. Now, in case this wasn't too obvious, git grep actually searches only in the current commit. It doesn't go through your entire history, but you can point it to some other commit. So if we do glol, then we're going to see that at the very bottom, the initial commit is 1f6a. So if we're gonna go do this, and we're gonna say 1f6a, then we're going to see how it looked like in the beginning. It's going to search for with on this hash set. Let's make a tiny detour and talk about temporal searches. These are the searches where you can specify some dates, some time. So for example, you could say git log, right, one line, and then you can ask since, or you can also say after, which is exactly the same thing. It's a synonym. So let's do since, and you can say something like, which is very, very natural language like, you can say something like 1 week, and you can ask it to render it very prettily. Over here, we're going to say, please give me the hash, right? Then space, 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 space. Then give me the summary of the commit, space, 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 space. Give me the author's name, space, 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 space. And also give me the relative commit time, okay? Like this. Let's run it. And as you can see, these are the commits that happened in the previous week. We have the hash, we have the summary, which luckily has exactly the same amount of letters, and the author's name and when it happened. As you can see, the last one is 7 days ago, which is pretty much 1 week. Let's do the same thing with over here. Let's do 2 months. Okay, so we see a little bit more. We see over here like 8 weeks. All right, we can also do the same thing with after. As already mentioned, after is a synonym, right? So exactly the same thing should come out. Okay, we can also go the other way. We can see like, before essentially, right? So there's until and there's before, two synonyms. Until, let's do something like 1 year and 2 months, right? So we can see over here, and exactly the same thing with before. As already mentioned, these are just synonyms. And by the way, in practice, even though these CLI tools are very useful and very powerful, most IDEs and things like VS Code, they have like a lot of these things built in. Not to like this granular level of power, but like most things that you would use like daily, they're built into your IDE, so you don't need to remember a lot of these commands. And by the way, you're always like, when you're watching my videos or someone else's videos, they show you like all of these flags. Don't think even for a second that you can wake me up in the middle of the night and I'm gonna remember this, right? Pretty much the second I finish recording this video, I'm going to forget half of them, and when I'm gonna need some of them, I'm gonna start Googling for them, right? We're incapable of remembering like all of these flags. We're humans. All right, that was a long tangent. What you can also do is you can do this, -p, and then S for search, which is sometimes also called the pickaxe. P would show you the patches, would be test suite, like this. And as you can see, we find the test suites. I'm so used to pressing F7 and then just scrolling. Okay, so what you see over here is the initial commit. So you've seen the first time something that mentions test suite was introduced, which was the initial commit. It introduced it over here and it used it over here, which is very, very awesome. Now you can also see how something like test suite actually evolved over time, right? Over here we see when it was introduced. For this you can use the line search. So we do glog and then line, and then we have colon. Inside of the first columns we're going to have our search term, which is test suite. And over here we're going to need to specify the file name. And as you can see, the name of the file is very, very long. In fact, in the beginning was called like this. Currently it's not called like this, and this is exactly where fzf is going to be helpful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press Control T. It's going to pop up fzf and it's going to search for files inside of this directory. I'm going to type in test suite and it's going to find me the entire path. I'm going to press enter and it's going to take the entire path and just paste it over here. Okay, this is exactly what I need. So Control T, test, this is the entire path. I'm pressing enter. There you go. This is the full command. glog -l. We're searching for test suite : in this file. Okay, and now it shows exactly what happened to this file. So this was the initial commit, it was introduced. Okay, and then I did this, then I did that, then I did that, then I did that, then I did that. It's super useful, and it shows you the history of the not only of just the file, but actually of this term, which is also one of the things that you should know about Git, is that Git does not really care about the names of the files. So if you start moving things around from one file to another, or if you're renaming a file, Git can't really tell. It doesn't even try to tell when something was renamed or moved around. For Git, it's exactly the same change.